Okay, everybody, welcome to Mary Mother, part two.
Mary Mother.
Mary Mother, Mary Mother. So next week, we're going to dive into the other Mary, and I'm going to just start referring to her as the Apostle Mary. And because we're going to start to encounter her in some of the stuff that we're going to do today. So I want to share my screen and we will dive in. Okay, so last week we started to work with Mary, Mother of Jesus, and understanding where she existed in Scripture for Jesus's birth narratives, and we're going to take it to the rest of Jesus's stories and in the Scripture, and then we're going to talk a lot about tradition and some of the ways Mary's being lived out right now. Okay. I want to start with this one, which is one of my favorite Mary images. So this is from a 13th century manuscript, and it's an image of the Virgin Mary punching the devil. So thought you all would enjoy that as a good starting point. Okay, so let's talk about Mary and the infancy and youth narratives. And remember, these are going to be pretty sparse. There are not a lot of Jesus infancy and youth narratives. They're almost all in Luke, right? So they begin with Luke when they come to bring Jesus for the presentation to the temple in Jerusalem. So Jesus' first time going to Jerusalem. And Mary's not called out, but they, the mother and the father, are who attends that presentation. Now, interestingly, remember Luke is kind of the gospel where Mary is just so dang prominent in the birth stories, right? It's really Mary's story. Um, and that shows up in this blessing, right? So the baby is blessed, and then it is to the mother, it is to Mary that this prophecy is kind of given. This child is destined for the falling and the rising of many in Israel, and to be a sign that will be opposed, so that the inner thoughts of many will be revealed, and a sword will pierce your own soul too. So a little foreshadowing of the grief that is to face Mary. So that is the presentation. But interestingly enough, that makes sense in Luke. That is told to Mary, not to Joseph. Okay, so then we go on to, they go back home. They go to the Galilee, to the town of Nazareth. So in Luke, there's no flight to Egypt, right? And there's this simple statement: the child grew and became strong, filled with wisdom. Now we're going to revisit that statement when I break you up for the time of reflection, because I think that's a really interesting statement right there. Okay, so when Jesus is 12 in Luke, we have this story of them being back in Jerusalem for the Passover festival, and Jesus stays behind. And they just keep walking, and then they realize they don't have him, so they go back to find him. And they find him in the temple, and he is starting to teach, and he's expressing surprise that they would even like have to look for him, because he knew where he was supposed to be. But he goes back with them, back to Nazareth, and was obedient to them. And the infancy and youth narratives in Luke end with this statement: his mother treasured all these things in her heart. So that is pretty much the end of Mary in the infancy and youth narratives. So let's talk about where she exists in the ministry stories. The earliest one is one those of you who did Mark with me are going to recognize. And this is the one that is only going to exist in Mark, the earliest gospel. And when his family heard it, they went out to seize him, for they were saying he was out of his mind. So this is the one where the tale goes, Jesus's family tries to step in. Matthew and Mark are going to sanitize this story and remove this. Later on in Mark, we're going to find out that family is going to mean his mother and his brothers. But this is where they step in to basically stop him from doing what he was doing and teaching. And then we have this other story where, and it's in Mark, Matthew, and in Luke, almost verbatim, where Jesus is teaching, and with his disciples, he's been baptized. He's called his disciples and has begun his ministry. And his brethren and his mother, so his brothers, maybe sisters, and mother show up and basically call out to him. And Jesus is going to say, well, you know, who actually is my mother or my brother? It's you. This is my family, the people sitting around me doing God's work. So Jesus's family is a little worried. They go to check on him. And again, this is the little more sanitized piece that we see moving away from Mark. And Jesus kind of views them as a bit of a distraction and an interruption. He's not really disrespecting his family here. He's not rejecting his family. It's not really a negative about his family. It's more a positive what he's saying about the disciples, that is his true family because they're doing God's will. Okay. And then another one that occurs in all four of them is Jesus's rejection in his hometown. And the important thing about this one is how Jesus is referred to in all of them. So in all of them, Jesus goes back to his hometown, he goes back to teach, and he is rejected. All four Gospels have this story. The earliest Gospel is Mark. And this is the one we talked about last week. Very unusual. Isn't this Mary's son? The brother of James, Joseph, Judas, and Simon aren't his sisters here with us. So we really get an idea of Jesus's family in this one, and also how he was known, not by his father, but as his mother's son. Very unusual. Matthew, written, some 20 years later, is going to call him the carpenter's son and is not his mother called Mary. So we're going to remove that connection in Matthew in 20 years to being Mary's son. And we're also going to remove the sisters. But we still have the brothers in there. And then we're going to move to Luke, and it's going to be even shorter, and it's just going to be, isn't this Joseph's son? Without the mention of the siblings. And then in John, we're going to get the son of Joseph, whose father and mother we know. So you can see the progression over maybe 30 to 40 years, how that story is told in the Gospels. And Mary's prominence at the beginning and kind of minimization by the end. Okay, so again, in the ancient world, very, very uncommon that Jesus would be known by his mother, right? And then, the other thing is that by John, by Luke and John, you don't have the siblings, so they're gone. Okay, so I want to talk about the Gospel of John, which is really, I don't know what to think about that gospel. Sometimes I just love it, and sometimes I just shake my head, and sometimes I just don't even know what to do with it. So, and that's our next big Bible study with me. So we'll take on that one in January of 25. So interestingly enough, in Mark, Matthew, and Luke, this right here is the last you really hear of Mary. So Mary is not, Jesus's mother is not prominent in his ministry. None of the Gospels call her out. But John is a little different. The very beginning of Jesus's ministry in John is this wedding in Cana. And he goes with his mother. And and his mother and all the disciples. And they run out of wine. And Mary says to Jesus, you got to fix this, right? And he's not so happy about doing that. He doesn't want to do it, but his mother says, do it. And so he does it. So his first kind of public ministry is directed by his mother. And then John has this about what happened after the wedding is Jesus goes down to Capernaum, which we know from the other gospels. That's what he does in all of them. We know why he goes there. It's the crossroads. It's a very popular, it's a very strategic decision to base his ministry in. But John says that Jesus's mother actually goes with them on that kind of path into ministry. So John has Jesus's mother not only as the, I guess you could say, inspiration or impetus for his first public act of ministry, and also attending him and going with him into his ministry. So, yeah, now from this point on, Mary, Jesus's mother, is also going to disappear from John's gospel. So none of the four are going to have, oh, go ahead, Marilee. Marilee, do you have a question?
Sorry, I was muted. Was John the last gospel then?
Yeah, so the Gospel of John was written, gosh, it's debated because there's some parts in John. Hey, welcome, Tony. Good to see you.
Thank you. I've been trying.
So there's some scholars who think there are parts of John that are very, very early, but most of John is pretty late. And so it'll go Paul's letters, Mark, Matthew, Luke, John, and John is somewhere between 90 to 110. It had many revisions, so the final version of it exists somewhere in that later period.
Thank you.
Any other questions while we're here? Go ahead, Tony.
Doesn't Mary come back when he's on the cross?
Yeah, we're just about to go there.
Okay.
Yeah, so you see the mother in the birth narratives. You see Mary in the infancy and youth narratives in Luke. And then you see Mary and the kids basically show up early on in Jesus's ministry, visiting, checking in the three gospels. And then they're gone until the end. In John, you get Mary at that first basically public ministry and then heading off to Capernaum to do his ministry, and then she'll disappear. Now we're coming to the next part, which is basically the end part. Okay, so here's Mary at the death and resurrection. And I'm going to show you this chart just to make it a little, I thought you would enjoy this, Bernie. I used the King James version on this.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Every so often for you. We're going to go through this in greater detail, but basically in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, it's not going to be clear that Jesus's mother is there. It's going to be very clear that the apostle Mary is there in most of them, but not Jesus's mother. Now in John, it's specifically called out. There stood by the cross Jesus, his mother, and his mother's sister. So those are the ones present at the crucifixion. We'll go through these in detail. And then present on the day of the crucifixion. You see that as well. Okay, so we're going to dive into this a little more. So let's start off with Luke. If you all did Luke with me, remember that the women in Luke are pretty prominent and they show up pretty regularly, but they're generic women. Luke is going to reference collection of women with only a few of them called out. So on the road to the cross, this is the only one of the four that has, what are you doing? That has the women present. So, and that's Luke, and that the women basically were following him as he's walking to the cross, unique to Luke. Now, in Mark and Matthew, there is a Mary that's different than the apostle Mary that is present, right? In both of them, they're looking on from the distance, and that they had followed Jesus from Galilee. They had been ministering to him. Clear on all of these is particularly in Matthew, you see the Apostle Mary, but this Mary, the mother of James and Joseph and the mother of the sons of Zebedee is how Matthew says it. And then Mary, the mother of James the younger. It's not clear in Mark and Matthew if this is Jesus's mother. Most assumptions is it is. Now in Luke, it'll get even a little vaguer. Is the daughters of Jerusalem and the women who have come, right? So Luke is going to stick to that more generic demonstration of who's present. Now here's where it's going to get really different, which is the Gospel of John. And John's going to be very explicit, is standing near the cross. So John's going to make some big changes here. So in both Mark and Matthew, they're looking on from a distance, probably the safest place to be, right? John is going to put the Apostle Mary, Mary mother, and Mary aunt right near the cross. So this is unique to John. And Jesus is going to interact. He's going to see his mother, and he is going to ask the beloved disciple. So the beloved disciple is something we're going to really dive into when we get to the Gospel of John. The beloved disciple you could think of as the voice of John. Jesus, one of his final acts in the Gospel of John is going to be finding his mom a home with his beloved disciple. So he is going to say, you are going to go and be with my beloved disciple. My beloved disciple, I want you to take care of my mom, right? So that's one of his final acts in John, which is really, really interesting. Now, from that point on, though, Jesus's mother disappears from the Gospel of John. But it's a pretty prominent one, pretty prominent component of Jesus's death in the Gospel of John, inspiring a ton of art. In this one, Mary is the one with the hand on her breast. The Apostle Mary is the one at her feet. So we're going to kind of dive into how she has been portrayed in art throughout time. Very stark difference right there. And then this is Rubens. And again, the one at the feet is the Apostle Mary, and the mother is the one reaching out her hand. So this is the depiction of Jesus coming off the cross based on that text from the Gospel of John. Okay, so we already covered this one. Okay, so let's talk about the resurrection. So remember, we're not really clear which Mary this is in Mark, but we think it's his mom. The Apostle Mary and Mary, the mother of James and Salome, are going to bring spices. James, we're pretty confident, is Jesus's brother, who will go on to be the head of the church in Jerusalem, who's going to run afoul of Paul. So we're going to hear more about James when we get to Acts and Paul's letters. Matthew also has Mary at the resurrection, again with the Apostle Mary, and they go to see them. And so in Matthew, Mary, assuming that's the mom, along with the Apostle Mary, is going to become the first witnesses to the resurrection. And then Luke, we're going to stay with, the women throughout most of it. But then at the very end, we're going to see again, it's the Apostle Mary, Joanna, Mary, the mother of James, and the other women who go and witness to the resurrection. Okay, so let's talk about whether or not Jesus's mother was there both at the end and at the beginning for the resurrection. So Most biblical scholars think that the Mary in Mark is Jesus's mother. And most scholars think there are just two Marys in Matthew. It's the Apostle Mary and the Mother Mary. So yes, that most scholars do think that was Mary, the mother of Jesus at both. John's very clear. It's the mother, right? There's some theories about why they don't just come out and say that that's the mother, right? It could be hearkening back to that earlier thing where we had Jesus kind of distancing himself from his family and talking about his true family. Could be something connected to that. And it could be that these were written down after Jesus died. So Mary, as Jesus's mother, she's no longer defined in relationship to him in ancient terms. At the end of the day, we don't know why. We just know that it's not necessarily clear in 3 of the Gospels, but most scholars think it's her. Okay, Mary outside of the Gospels, she shows up, interestingly enough, in Acts, and that she is present with the earliest who are gathered after Jesus's death, and that she's there with the apostles, all the other women, and Jesus's brothers. So she shows up in Acts, and that's it. That's the last you'll hear about her. We're going to take on the book of Revelation in a couple of weeks, and we're going to talk about whether or not this woman that shows up in Revelation is, in fact, Mary, the mother of Jesus. So there's some interesting theories about this one. But when you look at where is Mary in the outside of the gospel stories, this is where these 3 are the only ones that will show up. Okay, which means none of the Paul letters, Mary's not there, none of the non-authentic Paul letters, none of the later epistles, Mary doesn't exist in. Okay, let's talk a little bit about Mary theology. And so, and please know when I share this stuff with you that I'm just sharing it as general knowledge, not my own personal understanding, okay? So we're going to cover some Mary theology. So Mary has been traditionally viewed as the mother of God, a powerful intercessor for all who pray to her. And we're going to talk about whether or not that lasts through the Reformation. Her example of devotion is viewed as inspirational for millions and millions of Catholics around the world. She is viewed as a symbol of divine grace in female form, inspiration for more traditional roles of motherhood, lifted up as often as example of more traditional roles of motherhood, nurturing, submissive, receptive. She's also known as the God Bearer, the Queen of Heaven, and Madonna. So there's 4 Marian dogmas in Catholicism, and you Catholics on the phone, you feel free to correct me if I got any of these wrong. First one is that Mary is the mother of God. By saying this, Mary's the mother of God, the church is not saying that Mary provided that divine component, that divine nature of Jesus, but that she, by giving birth to Jesus, meets that kind of stipulation of the mother of God. So Mary is mother of God because her son Jesus is true God, true man. Catholicism. Dogma 1. Dogma 2 is the Immaculate Conception. So we've talked about that last week. This understanding that Mary was conceived without sin. So, and that again is based on that scripture component, Hail Mary, full of grace, in Luke. That's the only place that comes from. And then the third one is Mary's perpetual virginity. Not only was she a virgin when she gave birth or when she got pregnant with Jesus, but she remained a virgin throughout her life. The fourth one is the Assumption of Mary. So this one does not come from scripture. There's no scripture to base this on. This came from early church teachings and traditions. Silent on whether Mary had a normal human death, but what the Catholic Church teaches is after she died, she was taken up into heaven, body and soul, by the power of God. So she ascended into heaven, right? And this is because Mary's soul, remember from the Immaculate Conception, was perfectly sinless, right? So she went straight to God. And her body was not subject to corruption. Okay. Okay, so those are the 4 Catholic dogmas, teachings, understandings about Mary. So other kind of understandings of Mary, and some of them I just think are kind of beautiful, right? The openness and the willingness to partner with God in this co-creation is a pretty beautiful thing. Mary present through his life, even in the final moments, standing with him. That her story even continued after that into Acts, where she was with and present with the earliest Christians who will go out and tell that story, right? Mary gets unequaled admiration and respect greater than any saint in the Catholic Church. Is seen as an example of perfect discipleship and is viewed as an intercessory. So, meaning, this is very odd for Protestants to wrap our heads around, but that by praying to Mary, Mary acts as an intercessory with prayers to Jesus and God, right? And I will tell you, having grown up in a Catholic home, oh my gosh, the size of the Mary statue that my mother still has in her bedroom. It's easily 3 feet tall. And it got knocked over more than once. So it has broken. It has been super glued back together. But my mom at 95, no longer a Catholic, still has that Mary statue and still prays daily to Mary as the intercessory. It's a very powerful connection, right? And including Mary devotion, that's where you see that connection to the rosary. Okay. I want to talk about Mary showing up throughout the world, the Marian apparitions. So they've shown up through time. Mary has shown up through time, through Catholic history. There has been multiple reports of Mary showing up under these miraculous circumstances. What happens is the claims are then investigated by the church. 26 of these appearances have been given formal approval by the Catholic Church. Almost universally, once they're approved, Mary, if you find out that Mary has requested the building of a church and some type of increase in spiritual practice, prayer, fasting, sacrifice. So when you hear about Our Lady of Fatima, Our Lady of Lourdes, Our Lady of the Miraculous Medal, Our Lady of Guadalupe, these are all miraculous appearances of Mary. So I want to go through one of them. So let's start. We're going to go through Our Lady of Fatima. So Mary appears to 3 peasant kids in this village of Fatima, Portugal in 1917. So the kids are out tending their sheep. They're pretty young, right? And they have this vision of a woman surrounded by light, and the woman identifies herself as the Lady of the Rosary, or Mary, the mother of Jesus. So the children not only see her that one time, but they see this vision, and all 3 of them see it 5 more times, once a month. During these appearances to these 3 kids, she supposedly gives them 3 secrets and encourages them, exhorts them to pray the rosary for world peace, right? And kind of devotions to her. The children also said that she told them God's going to perform a miracle on a very specific day, so October 13th. And God will do this miracle so that people would believe. So on October 13th, about 70,000 people gather in this little village and to witness what the kids have been told is this miracle that would make people believe. And it's been described as some type of solar phenomenon in which the sun appeared to fall towards Earth. So it's known as the miracle of sun. Now, not everybody reported seeing the same thing. Some said that they saw the sun dance among the heavens. Some they saw the sun zoom towards Earth, thinking it might actually hit us. Some saw brilliant colors, and thousands of others didn't see anything unusual at all. So there's a wide variation of witnesses to this event. But Fatima would go on to become the location, one of the greatest Marian shrines in the world. So thousands and thousands of pilgrims go every year to this site. It was officially recognized as a Marian visitation not long after. So it took the Catholic Church about 13 years to do the official recognition. So remember, she said she gave the kids 3 secrets. 2 of the secrets were the Vatican did disclose them in the 40s. One was the prediction of the end of World War I and the start of World War II, and the rise and fall of communism. The third one, they did not release. And then in the year 2000, they announced that the third one was Mary's vision of the assassination attempt on Pope John Paul II. And Pope John Paul II did publicly come out and credit her for saving his life. So those were the 3 secrets that apparently were given to the kids. Lots of feast days in Catholicism. So. Okay, Eastern Orthodox, I'm going to just kind of go through this very quickly. Most of the initial stuff like God Bearer, Mother of God is going to match Catholicism. But Eastern Orthodox does not worship or venerate Mary, right? So she's held in high esteem. She is honored. She's given reverence. And also the Eastern Orthodox never taught the Immaculate Conception. They don't agree with it. They found no support for it. They never adapted this. And part of this is attributed to the fact that Augustine never caught on in Eastern Orthodox. And so you see a little division occurring. Now, the earliest Protestant, of course, was Luther. And Luther was a monk. So he was a Catholic monk before he kind of made his switch. He was very devoted to Mary. And as Luther stepped away from the Catholic Church, Luther kept almost all of the understandings of Mary, everything, right? As well as, most of the earliest Protestant reformers, Calvin, Zwingli, Cranmer, all of them kind of held to this belief that Mary was a perpetual virgin. Mary was the mother of God. Luther was a big advocate of the Immaculate Conception. And again, which isn't in the Bible, right? But he believed in it strongly, even though it wasn't in the Bible. Because it wasn't in the Bible, he didn't think it should be imposed on all believers, right? Luther was a deep believer and venerator of Mary. Lutheranism today has very little Marian theology, so it has been lost over time. Calvin also was a big Mary fan, and again, the UCC can track almost all of us back to Calvin. What happened, though, is that the earlier reformers after those first generations started to reject Marian mediation, right? Because they rejected all mediation. They rejected the priest as an intercessory. They rejected Mary as an intercessory. So Mary was kind of part of that rejection. And the pendulum swung really far for Protestants away from both Catholicism and those earliest reformers. None of those Marian affirmations of the earliest reformers survived, and swung all the way to the other. And what you saw was the emergence of Mary idolatry understandings, right? That any of the practices of Mary veneration and devotion were equated with idolatry. And that's where this term Mary idolatry came from. So that this worshiping, the venerating, the intercessory prayer of Mary, it was like idolatry, and it distracted from true devotion to God. You see that to this day. To this day, you can see that in modern day Protestantism. I want to make sure you all have seen this. This is United Church of Christ Statement of Faith. We do not have a creed. This is a statement of faith. And what is missing in this, as opposed to any of the creeds, is any reference to Jesus's birth, any references to Mary or her sexuality. All of that is gone. We have the man of Nazareth is how he's referred to. But in the UCC statement of faith, there is no kind of recognition of Mary or Mary's role. Okay, some reasons why Mary matters. You know what? She was a poor, vulnerable Jewish girl living in an occupied land who gave birth to Jesus. She was the Christ bearer. Something new happened through her courage of kind of stepping in and bringing that pregnancy forward and raising that child. And this is probably my all-time favorite Mary quote. We are all meant to be mothers of God, for God is always needing to be born. That's my favorite Mary quote. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing there and just check in and see if there's any questions before I send you off into two groups. Okay, Bernie, you go first.
The Book of Mary, what does it deal with?
So the Book of Mary, this is why it's so good to have Reverend Michael here. She's my resident Mary expert. So the Book of Mary, we're going to deal with next week, because that is the Apostle Mary.
Okay, thank you.
Apostle Mary, and I'm going to show you some pieces from that. Michael's done some wonderful kind of scholarly work pulling that together for us.
Good.
So hold on to that one.
Thanks.
Go ahead, Tony.
So what I get is that Mary had other children.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
So were those immaculate births also?
So the Catholic Church is going to teach that those are her stepchildren, that she came into those were Joseph's who brought them into the marriage.
Okay. So she didn't give birth to them.
That is what the Catholic Church teaches.
Okay.
Yeah. There's no differentiation of how they're described in scriptures, but that would be the Catholic Church for you. Go ahead, Marilee.
Is there any way that they figured out how to tell what parts of the scripture were written at different times? I mean, it seems like they get amended as beliefs change. And so a lot of the stuff it says about Mary could very well have been added even at the St. James time, right? When it's already established what Mary is. Or how do they know when things change? Do they have old Bibles to study?
They do not. They do not have like original texts. So the original texts are all gone. But one of the things biblical scholars will go and they'll go back and they'll look through the text and they'll look for kind of a change of voice, a change of tense, where it's real apparent that something came in that didn't fit or something was added in. And they're usually pretty easy to see. There was one that we did in the Paul one that was really, really glaring. There's one we're going to talk about in Mary where the current scholarship is they actually went in and changed the manuscript. So we're going to deal with that one when we come to the Apostle Mary.
Well, that one text where at the very end it said the people present were, it was almost like that was added on.
Yeah. Okay, anybody else? Oh, go ahead, Paul. You're on mute.
Yeah. So why do they talk about Mary, the son of James? Who's James? Which James is he?
It's Mary, the mother of James.
That's what I mean, mother, yeah.
And James is often understood to be Jesus's brother.
Who is the stepbrother?
If you're the Catholics believe he was a stepbrother.
Okay.
Protestants believe that Mary went on to have other children.
And why do they refer to it in that way?
As the mother of
Mother of James. Why don't they say the mother of Jesus?
Yeah. So that's that's at the end, at the cross. And that's that slide I was showing you that they don't quite know why. They think that it's Mary, Jesus's mother, at the end in Mark, Matthew, and Luke. But they don't come out and say it. Neither one of them come out. None of the three of them come out and say it. Most biblical scholars think it's her. And they didn't name her because option one,
Right.
Jesus had been distancing himself from the family. Option two, they're written after Jesus died. So that relationship to Jesus is gone. Or option three, we just don't know why they did it. But most scholars think it was his mother.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so here's the questions. I'm going to give you an option of choosing which question you want. Okay, so here's the two questions. You can either pick how or why does Mary, the mother of Jesus, matter to you? Or go back to this statement from Luke. The child grew and became strong, filled with wisdom. And think about what role you can imagine Mary, Jesus's mother, had in Jesus's growth and development. Okay, so I'm going to give you about 6 minutes to go on and have a quick conversation about either one of those. Okay, I'll see you back here in a bit. Okay, who's got thoughts on any of the questions you chose to take on? Go ahead, Paul.
Well, I had a question of what was normal education like back then? I mean, how did that happen through the synagogue or, where did they learn back then? Anybody who learned anything?
So remember, he is growing up in the backwaters, a peasant in an occupied system. And so chances are he was illiterate and easily, let's just say, did not speak Greek and spoke Hebrew and could maybe read some of the Torah that was in the synagogue.
But would his mother have been involved in that, or was she illiterate also?
Chances are all the women were illiterate. Yeah.
Which makes it very interesting that when they found him in the chapel in Jerusalem teaching, I think he read more maybe than we think.
Yep.
Or he had a very good memory and really had taken in what these rabbis had said. And maybe added his own.
Yep, he could have been doing it from rote. He could have been able to do it back.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point because I seem to have a lot of Islam coming into my life these days, but when they do Ramadan, which they're doing now, they recite the entire Quran from memory. And in these early times, I think memory was much stronger and relied upon. Storytelling was verbal. And I bet a lot of education happened without writing.
And virtually
No,
no
and
reading.
Nick Bach and Nassim got here, and they always appeared to me like they could have been from 2,000 years ago. But anyway, Nassim was the only one that knew how to read or write, and that was from what do they call the schools that they have that
The madrasas.
madrasas? Yeah, he had some teaching in madras, but of course Nick Bach hadn't had any education at all.
So do we have any idea how Jesus and his family in this backwater practiced their faith? Would they have held in-house, worship or?
What?
So they're a Jewish family, and we know that best guess is they went up to Jerusalem to the main temple on a regular basis and did sacrifices there for Passover. And you could assume, like most ancient Romans, they'd go up there, they participate in Passover, they would pay the temple tax. And I don't know in Nazareth if there was a synagogue in Nazareth, but I would assume that they went to the local synagogue. And
Didn't when Jesus went back to teach and they'd say, "Isn't this Mary's synagogue?" Wasn't he teaching in a synagogue?
Yep, you're right.
But I think the Jewish religion is not just a religion, it's a culture, it's a way of life.
Yeah.
I assume that Mary and Joseph and Jesus lived that way of life.
Yep.
And then, if they could make it into a temple, they went.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Shabbat every week.
Yeah.
Don't work on the
I think
Sabbath.
Michael's point too, that Mary obviously believed that Jesus was divine from the beginning. I mean, she believed that she was carrying a divine child. And so that would have been given to him in his birth, and in his growing up, that he would have known from the beginning that he was special and he had a special mission. And that would have come from Mary.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we're gonna wrap up because we're at time. I will tell you here's why I am unceasingly devoted to Mary as Jesus's mother. It is because of the time between his birth and he enters his public ministry. And I have to imagine that a being that went forth to live love in such a radical way had to have been marinated in love as a child. Mm. And so, and I give that all to Mary. And which is why for me, probably the most heartbreaking piece of art that exists is the Pieta by Michelangelo, where she's in the body. And so, so that's, I really, as a Christians, if we profess that, Jesus is the reflection of God. So when we see Jesus in the world and we see those actions, we're seeing the reflection of God. I do believe that reflection is amplified by the gift of Mary's love and care. So that's where I come down on Mary. So.
Yeah, Mom.
Yeah, Mom.
Okay, next week we're heading into some really interesting territory. We're going to deal with the Apostle Mary, and there are going to be plenty of opportunities to be confused, to be enraged and indignant on her behalf, and to be really called into how her story is being reclaimed. And I'm going to lean heavily on Reverend Michael for this one, who's just, I think of as our Apostle Mary guide too. So we got 2 more we'll do on the Apostle Mary next week.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye now.